Chapter 4. Flowey. The same place, the same thing. Frisk remembered how the first time he had entered Asgore's house, the similarity had struck him so that he'd hesitantly called for Toriel. "Mom?" The doorways, the carpets, every stick of furniture the same. Only on closer examination had he seen the disparities. The scuff marks on the carpet from small, careless feet. The gouges on the door frames from where someone with very sharp horns had forgotten to duck. The books on the shelves covered in patinas of dust. The reading chair whose seat was stiff and cracked. The color of the light. The lingering melancholy air. And the monsters. He remembered how confused he'd been at seeing them all in this house. They'd croaked quietly on seat cushions, buzzed on high shelves, gently jiggled on the end tables and in corners. None of them had acknowledged him. He'd crept around feeling like an intruder. In a sense, that's what he had been. Now he stepped into the house and shut the door behind him. He made his way to the right and down the hall and into the first room on the left. He remembered how he'd finally shaken off his déjà vu in this room. How the twin beds and different toys had convinced him that no, this wasn't where he had been before, and Toriel wouldn't come no matter how loud he called. One bed surrounded by dusty toys, their blank button eyes staring off into space. The other one undecorated and bare, the air around it oddly cold. The two unopened boxes lay on the floor. He remembered that one held a heart-shaped locket, and that wearing it had somehow made him feel safer, giving him the determination to make it through the fights ahead. He had left the locket untouched every time after that. It didn't belong to him. Instead, he bent over the other box and opened it. He removed the knife he found there. Its blade nicked and mottled with rust. He held it up to the light. He tested its weight. Then he left the room and approached the key on the far side of the hall. He remembered that this was when they would speak, and so, on cue, the monsters raised their heads.
"A long time ago, a human fell into the ruins. Injured by its fall, the human called for help."
He remembered the first time he had fallen, lying there breathless among the flowers, staring up at that circle of sunlight, unsure of whether he could get up, or whether he even should. He took the key and returned the way he came. He avoided looking in the mirror. He felt the monster's gazes on his back.
Asriel, the king's son, heard the human's call. He brought the human back to the castle.
He remembered that this was the first time he'd heard that name. He stepped into the kitchen and took the second key. He pulled open the door to the oven and saw the empty pie tin that lay there. He went back into the living room. He avoided looking at the golden flowers. Over time, Asriel and the human became like siblings. The king and the queen treated the human child as their own. The underground was full of hope. He remembered seeing Asriel for the first time, and how his face had lit up when he'd called out that unfamiliar name. How he had done the same later, with his body warped and surging with power, the unlocked souls surging with white light from every seam. How he'd drowned Frisk in searing light until it felt as though his skin would peel away and leave his soul bare, howling all the while for someone Frisk wasn't, begging for him not to leave. Frisk unlocked the chains blocking the staircase and descended, the knife's handle cold against his palm. He reached the bottom step and stared into the hall beyond. It was thronged with monsters against both sides, all shapes and sizes, every one he'd met and then some, all silent, averting their eyes or equivalents of eyes. They felt like the crowd for a funeral procession. In a sense, that's what they were. He took a deep breath and kept walking.
Then, one day, the human became very ill.
The tapes in the laboratory depths. Dark words sealed within sticky cases. The trembling in Asriel's voice as he'd promised to fetch the flowers. the trembling in Asriel's voice as he promised to fetch the flowers.
The sick human had only one request: to see the flowers from their village. But there was nothing we could do.
The flowers bending in the breeze. The scent of sweet lemons.
The next day, the human died.
The flower patch in the ruins, its earth soft and welcoming. The half-open coffin in the basement, filled only with darkness. Toriel standing over the flowers with her palms clasped and her head bowed. Asriel standing in the same place, in the same position, before he'd sensed Frisk approaching. Frisk and Asriel speaking there, and how Asriel would sometimes, half-consciously, place one hand on that earth as he talked, as if lulling the ground back to sleep. The monsters unspooled their history as Frisk walked amongst them, explanation and apology in one. The cause of their regret, and why he had to die. As he stepped out of the hall and onto the bridge leading to the castle, he found himself flanked by the carved metropolis of New Home, where everyone who had watched Mettaton's last hurrah had stepped away from their televisions and taken to the windows, the rooftops, the streets. Innumerable gazes pressed down on him like a weight. The monsters on the bridge continued their story, each picking up where the previous had left off, their souls resonating with this bitter nostalgia. Though every face was different, and some barely had a face at all, Frisk could make out something their expressions all shared. Maybe gratitude. Maybe relief. He remembered that this was where he had cried, for the first time in a long time. He remembered that this was where he had cried, for the first time in a long time. He'd been frightened of his own tears. He hadn't been sure what was causing them, or how to make them stop. Now his steps did not falter. He silently mouthed each word as it was spoken. With each swing of his arm, light winked off the knife's blade.
It's not long now.
King Asgore will let us go.
King Asgore will give us hope.
King Asgore will save us all. He remembered Asgore's face when they had first met, that uneasy mix of resolution and resignation. The look of someone who had found himself hopelessly trapped in the machinery of his own choices. He understood that face a little better every time they met.
You should be smiling too!
Aren't you happy? Aren't you excited?
He remembered that this was when the final frogget would leap off the parapet and land at his feet. The way it would turn its head up to look at him, the first monster to meet his eyes since he'd entered the house. That faint, desperate reassurance in its voice when it told him, "You're going to be free." And he was filled with determination. The antechamber beyond, where the Delta rune was tattooed on the far wall in stained glass, and the shadows of the columns cross-hatched the ground like prison bars. Frisk passed through that alternating darkness. He saw the figure standing there at the far end, its hands nestled in its hoodie pockets. Sans was always around for this. No matter where he had been, or whatever dead ends his latest attempts had sent him to, they would meet in this hall. Time after time he would appear. As Frisk approached, Sans's pupils shone, the only points of light in his silhouetted frame. Frisk felt that gaze bore through him. Then those two bright spots swiveled down to the knife clutched in his hand. They remained fixed there for a long while. Sans turned on his heel and walked off.
"Despite everything," he said, "it's still you."
He stepped under the shadow of a column and did not emerge again. The only proof he'd ever been there was the echo of his footsteps, already fading away.